I'm sure you must have heard by now that Reno Omokri has been appointed ambassador, non-career ambassador. Also, Femi Fani-Kayode. There's also the wife of the past Oyo State Governor, Ajimobi, Mrs Florence Ajimobi. There's Jimo Ibrahim. There's Grace Bent, Adamawa State. I like all the names are nice, but there's some names I just found very, very. I like the fact that Grace Brent is there. She represented Adamawa in the Senate. But one of the names I really, really, really like. One of the names I'm glad that the name is on this list is Otunba Femi Pedro. Was former deputy governor to President Tinubu when he was governor before they had a fallout. But I'm glad, this is happening. Apparently they've sorted it and they're making progress. All right, a few more things before we go on to other things. Someone says Yoruba men are replacing Yoruba women. Florence Ajimobi is not correct. Florence Ajimobi is Yoruba woman. No. She is Yoruba. She is Yoruba. I know what you want to say, but she is Yoruba. She is. Deal with it. Folashade Brent that is representing Adamawa State. Is she from Adamawa State? I don't know if you know who that person is. Do you know Folashade Brent? Grace Folashade Brent, who is representing Adamawa State. Where do you think she's from? When she was in Senate representing Adamawa, does her name, Grace Folashade, sound like somebody from Adamawa State? She got in there because of marriage. Florence Ajimobi grew up in Ibadon. Yes, the father is from Kiko. The mother is Yoruba. Even none of them is Yoruba. She became Yoruba. She grew up in Ibadon. Married, by the way, in Nigeria, just in case you don't know, because some of you are extremists. If you are not from Kiko, you're not Yoruba. She's Yoruba. She's more, let me not say she's more Yoruba than some people. She's Yoruba, sha. So Igbo women can become Yoruba. How is she an Igbo woman? How is she an Igbo woman? The thing about this thing is that you guys are extremists and somebody has to be telling the truth. It's about assimilation, not about where the person is coming from. If you have a culture that has a disdain for assimilation, people from that culture cannot become Yoruba, period. I don't care whether the person is Igbo, Hausa, or Fulani. The real issue, no, Abiola is actually her husband's name. The real issue is the people's willingness to assimilate into cultures. Yoruba people have done it in other people's regions. Other people have done it in Yoruba region. There are people in Yoruba, I don't want to mention names, maybe even some of your governors. There are people in Yoruba land that we know 1-2 generations ago. She's not Benin, she's Lebanese. Why do you people write all this in the comment section with so much confidence? She's not Benin. Her father is Lebanese. But in Nigeria, if you marry into a particular state, that man is that, you can claim that as a state of origin. I hope you know, by marriage. I hope you know that in Nigeria constitution, if a man marries somebody foreign, if the man marries a foreigner, that person becomes Nigerian. If the woman marries a foreigner, the man can never become Nigerian. I hope you know. Didn't our forefathers swear that Nupes and Baribas have assimilated? And so what? Is Shango's mother not Nupe? Will you go back in time and go and kill Shango because you hate the fact that they marry somebody outside? I beg, please. This is not the platform for that nonsense. Please. In fact, I'm going to mute it. I don't have time for. This is not the place where they do all those. You have 1 follower, 143 following. You don't have a name. I beg. Not here. Ejo. This is not the place for. This is not the place for extremism. If you have a problem with that, that's for you. But she's representing Yoruba land. She's a Yoruba woman. We like her like that. If you have a problem with that, you can talk to her. You can have a conversation with the government. Folashade Bent is representing Adamawa State. She's Yoruba. Her husband is Adamawa. She got married into that place. She's not only was she the senator, now she's going to become an ambassador, and they gave her the slot belonging to Adamawa State. How come you didn't see that? See, why are people pushing against Igbo? It's not because they are Igbos, it's because their culture abhors assimilation. Their culture is about takeover, domination. Therefore, they look down on the cultures they're supposed to assimilate into. Therefore, they cannot be allowed to take anything in those spaces. That's why. If you don't understand that basics, you just be like, it's not from you, but out, out, out. Meanwhile, all of my how was I, Jerry? Again, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but not on this platform. All those extremist views, don't bring them here. God bless you. God bless you, Yoruba land. And please, when you want to write these things in the comment section, please make sure you have your name and your face. Be bold. Don't be hiding behind burner accounts. Some of you will be worse than the people you are insulting if you have the power. Jesus Christ. The person said something earlier and said, Bariba, our forefathers swore that Bariba no pays Kiniko. Do you know? Do you know some of your kings in Yoruba land actually have Bariba heritage? Ẹ máa kọ́ kíní ìkẹ́ tó máa kìkì gbogbo extremism tẹ́ ń bá káàkiri. Because at the rate you are going to go back in time and wipe out a lot of families just to be able to have purity. And by the time you are done, we'll do DNA test for you and discover that you are not completely Yoruba. That would be very interesting, by the way. That would be it would be very interesting. Baribas are not Yorubas. Olushola Oshinawa, Baribas are a separate ethnicity. They are not Yoruba people. They are different. They are not Yoruba. They are a distinct ethnic group, and they have been distinct for a very long time. But in Oyo, there are Baribas who were part of the formation of the city-state. Maybe one day when we discuss Oyo, we'll talk about it. The Bariba people, Bariba communities, Nupe communities, and the Yoruba communities that make up what became Oyo. Some of those people, right, were now brought into, not all Baribao. Let me find a way to say it. Multi Bariba insane. In fact, Oromio went to an area. There were settlements there, just like it happened in Ife in the days of his grandfather. It's the same idea in different parts of Yoruba land. He gets there, he sees a lot of communities there. The Yoruba communities, they are Nupe communities, Bariba communities. Yoruba, of course, was the largest. Then you had Nupe, then you had Bariba. Now, again, it's not that all Baribas were there, but there were some Baribas who were there. There were some Nupes who were in that space. So what they did was to have them be part of the stuff. And that's why I discovered that every Bashorun for a very long time was Bariba, including the famous Bashorunga. Bashorunga is Bariba. Do you know one of the major warriors in Ibadon? He's a descendant of Bashorunga, who is Bariba. Do you know Sean Ogunlola was actually Bariba? All these things of purity, Aryan race, hey, it's a dangerous thing, no? It's a very dangerous thing. People assimilate and become Yoruba, and so you have the Alakbeni, for instance. You had certain titles just given to Antowalati so that they also feel like part of it. So they were creating a new identity, a new city state that did not exist before, it was created by Oromio, and then they built something out of it. But if Bariba, listen to what I'm about to say, if Bariba people want to fight Oyo, those who are Oyo will fight against Bariba. This is what we have in history. Because the ones who are here have now become the people. The real issue, and it's what you see across different cultures across the world. It's not a Nigerian thing, it's not even a Yoruba thing. Tombafe Jagun Bashorunga kò represent Bariba o, Ọ̀yọ́ lòun o. Tí Bariba fẹ́ gbógun ja Ọ̀yọ́, it's going to be against them, because it's like being an American. I mean, exactly. They become Americans and then fight against their countries because they don't see themselves as from that place. They are now Americans. We talk about Ogbomoso today. We celebrate Ogbomoso. Ṣọ̀ún Ògúnlọlá tó gbé orí Ẹlẹ́mọ̀ṣọ́, the one that fought for your king, Aláàfin. Who was Ibariba? And his descendants have been there. And they are Yoruba. They are not Ibariba now. They are Yoruba. Oshodi Takpa Leko. He was Takpa. He was Nupe. He was Takpa. His children are not. His children are Yoruba. His great-grandchildren, they are as Yoruba as myself. Who is from Ife? I'm from Ife, but they are as Yoruba as me. I'm not more Yoruba than them. You've got to be very careful. There's a thin line between, a certain identity and going extreme and becoming like a Nazi kind of, having a Nazi kind of ideology. Like, and so, but it's a pure, who is to tell you that you are a pure blood? And that's the funny thing with all this, can you have blood, mixed blood? You can do, can you call for it? That's called that you are like water. There are people who became Yoruba by naturalization. Ṣé rí gbogbo naturalization tó máa ń ṣe ń sìn òyìnbó kọ́ ló bẹ̀rẹ̀ o, àwa ti ń ṣe káwọn òyìnbó ní ká tó mọ òyìnbó àwa ti ń ṣe o. Àwọn kan wálẹ̀ Yorùbá láti Mali tó di Yorùbá o. I'm talking 6, 7, 8 centuries ago tó di Yorùbá o, tẹ́lẹ̀ mọ̀ yàtọ̀ sí yìí o. The point is, tí nǹkan bá ṣẹlẹ̀ ṣé Yorùbá náà máa gbá tì àbí ibi tó ti ń bọ̀? That's the test of whether the person is actually assimilated. That's the test. So you find a person who's, I know a family, 1970s, not Dele Yoruba. 1970s. Atọ́kọ àti ìyàwó gbọ́n ọkọ ló dá wá ṣá, ó marry, wọ́n ti bímọ, family kan adopt wọn, mi ní dárúkọ ìlú tán ti adopt wọn, wọ́n dẹ̀ dọmọ ìlú yẹn, Yorùbá ni wọ́n ń sìn. This is not even ancient history. This is 1970s. If I won't bring anybody's story on, I'll just say I can even show you. The real issue is, ṣé àwọn ènìyàn were assimilated into the culture? Why do we push back against Igbo representation in Yoruba land? It's not because of hate for Igbos. It's because of the culture of the Igbos. Their own culture repels the concept of assimilation because they believe in domination. And that's because that's the only way to make up for lack of evolution in politics and culture. And that's a fact. And if you want to have a conversation on it, I can bring you data, books for days. And because their culture repels or abhors the idea of assimilation, you cannot allow them to represent you, because once you put them in, they are going to do it for their people, not for these people. So if a person comes to Yoruba land and says, I want to represent Yoruba land, and we say, yeah, Lord, represent Yoruba land, and then before you discover what's happening, everybody that is giving jobs they are from his original father's house. That person is not Yoruba. And we have seen it not once, not twice, not three times, not four times. Do you know we've been voting Igbos in Yoruba land since 1951. 1951. Zik won a seat in 1951, and it was not in Federal Capital Territory. It was in Lagos. It was representing Lagos in Ibadon, in Parliament. The question you should be asking is, what did he do in that capacity to mú ìlọsíwájú bálẹ̀ Yorùbá? And it's not the only one. We had Tony Nwelu recently. We've had some of them in House of Assembly. We've had them. So we know. The reason we say no to them is not because they are hated. It's because that's their culture. Why do you think what the Sardauna said in 1964 is literally what you're still saying? I must become the Oga of everybody. That spirit cannot allow you to, because once you have that spirit of becoming Oga of everybody, when you see everything as competition, you cannot be Yoruba. I mentioned Oshodi Takpa earlier. He got into Lagos as a slave. Somehow, long story cut short, got into the palace of the Oba of Lagos. Eventually distinguished himself, started working for the Oba. His children went to school before the children of some aristocrats in Lagos. Always citing the Oba, even when the British arrived, and then there was the Akintoye and Kosoko issue, went to Ekpe, eventually at Ekpe, returned, built something as Yoruba men. Now, are you saying that I should now go to Saleko and go and tell Ekpe and tell all his children that they should move because they are Yoruba as myself? Why? Ẹ̀gbọ́n kan tó ń sọ tó máa sọ̀rọ̀ ṣé ó máa wà ní oríkì wọn pé báyìí náà ṣe débí, ṣùgbọ́n kì í ṣe pé bóyá ibẹ̀ lẹ́mí wọn wà. Let me break something. Well, it's not a table, sha. It's just I'm sure you probably know this. There are Lagosians today. 4 generations ago were Kanuri from Borno, Maiduguri, Kanem Borno Empire. That's where they came from. They are Eko. They are Lagosians today. Not Lagosian as in we are all citizens. That's not about indigene. Yoruba has a process by which you can become an indigene of a place where you're not even from. We do it amongst ourselves primarily, but we also extend it to outsiders. But there's a process. And to say that anybody who is not like that cannot come in is to demean Yoruba people, is to talk of us as tribal, primitive people. We have a very, very advanced politics in Yoruba land. Political culture. We have a very, very advanced political culture in Yoruba land. As at 11th century AD, people were moving into Ife, and some of them stayed back and became part of us. 11th century Ife, not recently. Why? Because Ife was where everything was happening. Everything was happening in Ife. People went to be in Ife. You know, it was a happening place. And this is not just, I'm not just, you know what? Maybe we should start from there. And by the way, if the Yoruba lady here who is responsible, if I see here, I hope you are hearing Ijako. It's just that I don't like extremists. It wasn't between 1200 though. It's between 1000. Between 1000. 1200 would be 13th century. 11th century is between the 1000s. I mean, within the 1000s. So from 1000 to 1099. I want to read something to you. We have to, I mean, we can push against so many things, right? But we've got to be very careful not to reduce ourselves because we're in Nigeria. Nigeria kolo determine isi Yoruba. I want to read something to you from a document that was written in, I think it was 1352. Someone says Igbos are not playing assimilation with anybody. The group that doesn't play assimilation is the primitive group in conversations like this. Any group that doesn't understand the concept is primitive. And I'll tell you why they do things the way they do, why everything is competition. Everything is, I'm better than you, I'm bigger than you. That thing is coming from a deep-seated issue. But I'm not sure they know. Well, some of the intellectuals know because they've written about it. But I don't think the people care because nobody's playing assimilation with Igbos. No. If you do, you're going to have yourself to blame. And that's why when we speak like this and people on social media say, oh, you don't like it, I'm like, you don't get it. There's an assumption, especially all this Yoruba sophisticated Tamabaka Kiri, there's an assumption that we are all the same. We're not. We're not. We are not. We are vastly different peoples, different understanding of cultures, different things, right? There are people, for instance, who, and again, this is not hate. I mean, I don't think that makes any sense, to be honest. You shouldn't be hating anybody. This is not about hating a group. I don't like that group. It's not about that. So here's the issue, right? You go to, say you go to a school, you're a teacher, right? When you get to that school to teach the kids, you don't assume the capacity of the kids. You don't teach them based on what you think, where you think they should be, or what you think they should know. I mean, my first job ever in this life was teaching job. So I started out as a teacher many years ago. I even had a coaching center. Oh boy, that's almost 30 years ago when I had a coaching center in where I had it. Mumbo, I think we're good. What was I saying? See, I started out as a teacher. One of the things you have to do as a teacher is you teach kids based on where they are, not based on where you are as a teacher. You don't teach kids stuff because you assume they would understand it, or you assume they must have learned some things. I mean, if you started out assuming, wisdom demands that you pause at a particular point and then you ask them, really, like, now once you discover that they don't understand that stuff, it doesn't mean they cannot understand it. They just don't. So if you want to teach them, you teach them knowing where they are, then you bring them up. Right? You bring them up. You have to find a way to discover where they are academically. You may have to give them tests. You ask questions in class. You ask the supervisor or the school owner or the proprietor or headmistress, headmaster, all those skinny. Now, when it comes to ethnicity, you study the ethnicity. Where is this group at this point? Not if I'm here, they're also here because we're all in one Nigeria. That is nonsense. We are not. We have vastly different understandings of what culture looks like. Therefore, knowing what we know, which hopefully we're not going to get into right now, unless of course I have to. The person that can make me get into it already muted him because we're just around the comment section. I don't want to spend time to talk about their culture because that's not to this conversation. It's really to get us to understand where we are coming from. So I was saying that we also sometimes, I wrote something on X responding to a statement by someone, and I said, we don't rate our forebears, we don't rate our ancestors. And there's this very funny thing where we think that, I mean, every generation must be better than the previous one, right? But that doesn't mean there's nothing to learn from the past. The idea that you see people go to places and you have to write exams to become citizens of different places, it's not new to the Yoruba mind. Why? Because it was open, and I was saying earlier, I remember where I stopped before we had to take a break on YouTube, that we had created a place that everybody wanted to come to, right, in the 11th century. And it was there for 400 years. It was like that. And one person, right, wrote an account of what happened, in 1352. He didn't even get to Ife. He was Moroccan. He had traveled to Mali, and then they told him about this place, this people, this king, and what the place was like. I'm going to read to you from the Yoruba, A New History by Akinwumi Ogundiro. Okay? They said their sultan, that was the king, is one of the greatest sultans. Ile-Ife was the largest urban center, the biggest emporium, and the wealthiest polity in West Africa's rainforest belt, south of the Niger River during the mid-14th century, with more than 2 centuries of trading contact with the Western Sudan. On account of this fact, so basically they're saying that for about 2-3 centuries, right, they already had contact in the 11th century. This is the 14th century. So they've had contact with these people, and they are saying that at that time, in the mid-14th century, it was the wealthiest polity in West Africa's rainforests. When you see Western Sudan, don't think of Sudan, the country that you are seeing right now. I think I say this every time. When you see Sudan, when you see Ethiopia, don't think of Ethiopia that we have right now. What you have right now called Ethiopia originally is actually Abyssinia. Ethiopia is an older name. There are people here in Ethiopia who were in that Ethiopia, but Ethiopia is actually bigger than the Ethiopia you have now. Okay? The same way Sudan. Sudan is bigger than the Sudan that you have right now. Sudan encompasses just about everywhere that blacks lived. So the word Sudan means black. So Bilad al Sudan is land of the blacks. That's from the perspective of the Arabs. So different cultures will give us different names. So the Arabs call us Sudan. The Portuguese call us Guinea. It means black. Right? The French will say Niger. From Latin, Niger. English also say Niger. Nigeria, Niger is all black. Okay? So all of this is just black from different perspectives. Niger, Niger, Guinea, Sudan is black. Different cultures. So when you say Western Sudan, it doesn't mean that the western part of the country, there was no country called Sudan at the time. Okay? In fact, it didn't even exist. All of that to say that at this point, it had become the most powerful, the wealthiest, attracting people from different places. Some of them to trade, some of them, went to, if you hear that somewhere they happen, you go there now, like Lagos now. Lagos attracts people from different places. Why? Because they share there. That's exactly the same thing. People will move into that place because they find opportunities, right? You attract people from different places. The point I'm trying to make here is this. The idea of having cosmopolitan cities in Yoruba land is not new. I'm going to read from the book I mentioned, History of the Yoruba by Stephen Banji Akintoye. By the 9th century, 9th means 800 AD, the 800s. This is the 2000s now. This is 2025, 2000, so 800s. That's about the 21st century, right? Mm-hmm. By the 9th century, Ife was a center of very prosperous agriculture. Such healthy agricultural production stimulated the growth of population. The traditions to the effect that new agbele were always being built in all the Ife settlements by the beginning of the Oduduwa Revolution testified to the growth of population, which in turn supplied more labor for agricultural production. Also, and very importantly, the production of surpluses in agriculture created a strong base for the growth of trade, both local and long-distance trade. For the early development of trade across the Niger with the West African savanna and beyond through the Sahara to the Mediterranean world, Ife occupied a particularly advantageous location. Directly south of the point at which the valley of the Niger describes a southward bend, the West African tropical forest also bulged northwards, so that a route from the Niger bend to its forest bulge provided the shortest connection from the Niger to the forest for the A route from the Niger bend to this forest bulge provided the shortest connection from the Niger to the forest for the exchange of savanna and forest products. Ife lay in the middle of this forest bulge, making it a natural terminus of the earliest central north-south route in this region of West Africa. This made Ife the earliest center of the north-south trade in the Yoruba forest and established it as the earliest great commercial center south of the Niger. The trade stimulated the production of some goods and gathering to Ife of others. I'll take that part again. The trade stimulated the production of some goods and the gathering to Ife of others. The interaction of production, surpluses, and trade established the foundations of wealth. Ife thus began the journey into greatness, economic, cultural, and political, much earlier than the rest of Yoruba land. He's talking about the 9th century AD. Others, the gathering to Ife of others, people who were not Yoruba, who were not even from around, they moved in because of trade. Other routes developed to connect the central route to other regions of West Africa. One such route, or route, depending on where you're from, pointed northwestwards to connect with the ancient city of Gao on the upper Niger, a city that by the 9th century was already a considerable center for the riverine trade as well as the terminus on trans-Saharan routes, and was later to become the capital city of the Songhai Empire. That a route such as this was already a factor in the Bogu and Yoruba region by the 9th century is, according to Robin Orton, indicated by a number of traditional and cultural evidence. Another route seems to have pointed southwards. I mean, there are routes coming out of Ife eastwards. There's one that went eastwards, southeastwards along the corridor consisting of Ijesha, Ekiti, and Owo countries. Then you had the one between Yoruba and Benin. The point is that it was a place that people came to, right? Why do people used to travel to all these places? Trade. There was ivory, there was dried fish, palm oil, all these things were, there was cola nuts, there were of course the beads, shegi and inyo. We'll have a full session on this thing so I can really go deep into it because article or not already. But what's more social and I read it already from the book by Professor Akinomogun. Sorry, I read Professor Akinomogun, and I also read The History of the Yoruba by Professor Banji Akintoye. The point is that, you know, when people talk about Lagos being cosmopolitan and it should be open, I think they're not thinking straight because they assume that we don't know we have never seen what cosmopolitan means until Lagos arrived. Before Lagos was formed, Yoruba people have been cosmopolitan. Because the people that went to form Lagos, they came from that cosmopolitan place. The person who led folks who eventually moved to Lagos is Ogunfunminire. Olofin Ogunfunminire is from Ife. And the idea of cosmopolitanism in Ife started more than 1,000 years ago. So you have people flowing into it. So what do you do to make that work? You create a structure that allows them to assimilate and become part of the culture. But you can't do that in Nigeria. You can't have that blanket thing in Nigeria. Because there are people who think what gives them right in your space is constitution. And I've said before, anybody who moves into ancestral spaces and begins to act based only on constitution is a primitive person. There's constitution, there's culture. Anyone who takes constitution above culture in other people's land is a primitive person. Doesn't think straight. And that's why you notice that the things that the culture can give to them, they try to get it through the constitution, e.g., Indigenous Status Bill. Why would you want to become an indigene of another person's area when you don't even care for their culture? Whereas, if you had been properly integrated, you will not even know. And that culture allows people to get into it depending on its own criteria. And I said earlier that the reason we can't do it like blanket or we're all one Nigeria is because how can Nigeria just go everywhere be shouting we're all one Nigeria, I can do anything. That's why we tell them that no, you can't do anything. But if I decide to visit your place, I will not ask anyhow as well. So when you are here, this is how we behave, this is how we do things, and if you can't do it, out. And if you stay because of constitution, the things you can only get because of culture, you will never get. So say you can stay there because of constitution, okay. But how you're supposed to live, to understand culture, you never be able to enjoy those things because you're just thinking of a piece of paper. And I read the book I just read right now. You hear what I said though? 9th century. 9th, OT open. 11th was when it became proper empire. You can't become an empire without different people coming into your space now. So you have to create a structure that, I mean, if you can, ẹrú lè di ọmọ ìlú, ẹn tó jẹ́ pé ẹrú náà fi mú wá nú ìlú yẹn, ó lè di ọmọ ìlú yẹn. Bẹ̀lẹ̀ntà ṣe ẹn tó wá jẹ́ pé òun fẹsẹ̀ rìn wá tó wá tajà, ó wá dúró. The Yoruba people who also traveled as far as Senegal and stayed there, and also became Burkina Faso, Senegal, that area. We're going to have a session on these things one day. And I like I said, I always like to read books when I'm discussing these things so that it becomes easier to, it doesn't like, I just saying it, it's just, fabu. It's not fabu. So you are gungan.